Hello, this is Gretchen, the Verdant Crafter. Today I'm going to show you 10 cards I made using the My Monthly Hero September 2017 card kit of the month. So first we're going to look at what was included in this kit. There are 5 great ink cubes, this fantastic stamp set, it's layering and it's so easy to use, some raffia twine. This stamp set is so much fun, and I love that on the back they included directions for how to layer the different parts. I certainly didn't use everything. I didn't use the little bee that's there. That's just adorable, and I can't decide if it's a pumpkin seed or if it's a little leaf, but it's individual. I did use lots of pumpkins, lots of leaves, and lots of sunflowers. We also got 2 pieces of parchment or vellum in orange, and these little brass charms. They're super adorable and very classy. I didn't use them, and that's Bruiser, my cat. She's saying hi. So you got 2 leaves and 3 sunflowers. You got a bunch of ink cubes. So we got butter bar ink, which I was super excited to get. I know a lot of people like it. We also got, Cup of Joe, pumpkin pie. So here's the butter bar ink. Here is the pumpkin pie ink. The Cup of Joe ink. I think that one is tangerine. And the last one is orange soda. Of course, these are the great Hero Art inks that smooth out as they dry, so that color isn't the true color that it will be in the end. The 2 pieces of orange vellum and this sort of rock paper, it's nice. It has just a little bit of gray flecks in it, which adds some interest. We're jumping into our first card here. So I am using my Misty, and I'm showing you how I made 4 of the sunflowers. In this case, I'm using my Altenew inks just because I wanted a lighter color than the butter bar ink. In the end, I made tons of these, and I don't show you them, but I made them in all kinds of different color combinations so I could see what I liked best. I did tend to go towards the yellower ones, but I made some in red. A Misty stamp positioning tool for this, so here's the butter bar, is fantastic for this because you can really line everything up exactly how you want it. And here is my last layer, and I'm using the pumpkin pie. I do want to let you know that these ink cubes are not labeled. I labeled them using one of just a little label maker, so I knew what they were. Here is the center. And the center was very easy to line up. I'm using my Altenew Caramel Toffee to stamp the center, and I believe for the last layer I'm going to use the Cup of Joe. I certainly love sunflowers. I think they're fantastic. They're a great flower, and they're just so cheerful. So here are my sunflowers. I am going to end up die cutting those out, which I won't show you on screen. And here is the bottom layer for the sunflower stem, and that's the top one. I did use some Simon Says stamp inks because I felt like they gave me the colors that I wanted. I don't have a huge collection of ink, so I use what I have. In this case, you can see I didn't line them up very well, but I'm okay with that because we're gonna do some other stuff. Here, I'm just stamping one so it's a base. What I'm gonna end up doing is popping up a sunflower above it. So just in case you looked under the edge, I wanted you to be able to see something. I like that this sunflower sort of had I'm going to call it a ding in it. You can see it's got a little U shape where I stuck it on its stem because it made it so easy to line up and see how things related to each other. On the side there, I had the different colors of ink that I used listed, but it's hard to see, and you saw what I used. So here I cut masks out of some post-it tape or post-it strips, and I just used the die that came with the kit. Unfortunately, I wasn't as careful as I thought I was, so when I cut this one out, you can see that I didn't get it exact. So I am going to cut just a little bit more post-it. Because I was using a die cutter, I put this on a regular sheet of paper. I put the post-it tape on regular paper, and then I sent it through the die cutting machine and peeled it off. Next, I'm going to get out my Distress Oxide inks, and I'm going to use Broken China to blend all over the background. There, I'm just taking off a little bit of the extra color. Distress Oxides are so forgiving, and they're so nice when you're blending. It's fantastic and so easy to get a good blend. They always look good. I am going to come in, I believe, with Chipped Sapphire right around the middle where the sunflower is to add just a little bit more depth and dimension. Now you can see looking at this that it's not a perfect blend, but it doesn't even out, but it still ends up looking fantastic. I also used one of the add-ons for this kit. It is this fantastic sort of Van Gogh Starry Night look. So I'm spraying the stamp with water, and I'm laying my piece on, and now I'm going to put a piece of paper over it so that I can press it down. That's actually from one of my lessons I did from the first day of school. Yay, science! I'm going to take it off, and I am going to clean off my stamp. And here I use my heat tool to set it. Because this is Distress Oxide ink, where it was wet, it becomes lighter and it sort of gets a chalky finish. I will say that my post-it tape did come up a little bit, but I'm okay with that because the underneath is really mostly hidden by the fact that I have popped up my sunflower. So here I am just going to stamp Sending You Sunshine. It was my favorite sentiment from here. It's a nice scripty saying, and it's something that's safe and nice to send to everyone. I like that you can do Sending You Sunshine, or Sending You Flowers, or Sending You Sunshine and Flowers. It's always nice when you can build up the sentiment how you want. I am using VersaFine to stamp this, and I am going to use my Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Ultrafine Embossing Powder. This is just such a nice, rich gold color, but it's not too in your face. It's a little bit more brassy. I also used an Embossed pen from Ranger to add a few dots to the center, and I embossed them with the same gold color. I think this just adds a little bit more interest to what could be a very plain card. Although the background, I think, is absolutely fantastic. This card kit is great for anything autumn related or flower related. If you're thinking about sending out Thanksgiving cards, this would be a great kit. So I'm just using some foam dots to pop up my sunflower. And there we go. I put this onto some white paper, white card base. It's a top folding A2 card base. And my background paper there is cut so it's 4 by 5 1/4 inches. So you have a nice border. Next, I'm going to show you how I made the background for one of the cards. I actually made it 3 times with slight variations, so I won't show you that. And honestly, I forgot that I made these by the time I got to the end. So here I have inked up my background with Versamark ink. I tipped over my Misty and I'm just running my hands over it to make sure that I get a really good impression. I'm going to take that up and I'm going to use the Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Embossing Powder. I made 2 of these with Antique Gold Embossing Powder, one this way and one sideways. And I made another one where I used some Hero Arts Pearl Embossing Powder. I did not use that one, but I believe you'll see me heat set that one. And I also stamped one with just sort of this frosted pigmented ink. Again, I didn't use that. Just covering all of this with the embossing powder. And I didn't get a perfect impression. I also didn't have everything perfectly covered with anti-static powder tool. So it's not perfect, but that's okay. It's still fun. Here is the card stock that I covered with the Pearl embossing powder, and I'm just going over it with my heat tool to set it. I had already at this point set the other cards with the Antique Gold embossing powder. I think it's just so much fun to watch the embossing powder change color and change texture when it melts. Okay. Oh, here's the gold one. And this is the one that I actually used. So here is my card. Oh, here we're going to be stamping another sunflower stem. My first 3 cards all have sunflowers on them. And here is where I stamped the second layer. I believe for this I used Simon Says Stamp Green Leaf for the base layer and Simon Says Stamp Laurel Green for the upper layer. I did fussy cut this out, and you can see that I used, or maybe you can't, some glossy accents at the back where the stem wasn't as thick as it could be, just to add a little bit more support. So here I am bending my Sending You Sunshine sentiment. So it goes all the way around a circle that I cut out of vellum. Of course, it's hard to see the vellum on the white background. There you can see it. I'm just fussing with it a little to make sure it's bent perfectly so that it follows the curve and it doesn't overlap the edge. With this sunflower, I actually cut off all of the white edge, and that's part of the reason that I fussy cut out the stem, so there is no white edge. The only white on this card is the back of the cardstock, or the edge of the card base. There I'm stamping with Versamark ink, and again I'm going to use my Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Embossing Powder. I think, except for one case where I used black embossing powder, that's the only color of embossing powder that I used. Oh wait, I think I also used silver at one point. This is a long video. I actually made 10 cards, or 11 cards. I had only meant to make 10 cards, and I actually have a bunch more to make because I have tons of sunflowers left and tons of pumpkins. But you don't need to see me make those cards. They're all going to be very similar. So I am going to use some multi-matte medium to, sorry, my cat is bruising. Multi-matte medium behind the sentiment and behind where I know I'm going to put my sunflower. I'm just weighing that with my block, and I'm putting multi-matte medium on the back of my sunflower leaves. I'm putting that down, and I will end up popping up with foam tape my sunflower to add a little bit of extra dimension. These are very flat foam squares, and that's nice. So these are from Scrapbook Adhesive. And in case you're wondering, I have the fine tip quilling top put onto my multi-matte medium. I love this card. It's very simple, it's very classic, and you know, it would take a little bit of time, but I think you could pretty much easily mass produce these. You can certainly mass produce the background, mass produce the sentiment. The only big part would be fussy cutting out your flowers. So now we are on to card number 3. I'm going to use some Lawn Fawn paper. This is going to be the brown plaid, diagonal plaid. I'm going to cut it out to be 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm going to use my 1/4 inch corner chomper just to give it some nice corner edging. This is a very easy way to add a little bit of interest to your card. In this case, I'm going to use the sentiment Autumn Greetings. I am going to emboss that using Versamark ink and the Simon Says Stamp Antique Gold Embossing Powder. In this case, the stamps, especially the sentiments in this card kit, are usually slightly curved, and they do look hand written, which I think they're supposed to. So it would make sense if you don't have lines that your writing would be curved. It adds a little bit of interest. But in this case, I wanted it to be straight across, so I did bend my stamp so that the sentiment is straight. Here I'm heat setting my sentiment. It doesn't show up very well at all times. The antique gold against the brown can be very, if it's in the shadow, it can be hard to see. But I kind of like that. Here I am just lining it up, and I know exactly where I want my ribbon to go. So I'm using some light blue ribbon because I don't have dark blue ribbon. I use some double-sided tape, and I'm going to put one end of the ribbon there. I'm just using my, not craft mat, but my craft paper to line things up. And I just did that on both sides so that my ribbon is perfectly straight across. I knew that I wanted a very nice bow, and I also knew that if I was trying to tie it when it was already on the card, I wasn't going to get it. I used multi-matte medium to, here I am using glue dots to put down my ribbon and make sure that the bow stays there. Now I'm using multi-matte medium on the sunflower leaves, and I'm putting that down. I sort of wish that I'd put it up a little bit more because my sunflower is a bit covered by the ribbon, and that wasn't intentional. In this case, again, I am using the foam dots to put down my sunflower, and I did angle it just so that that little notch is by the Autumn Greetings. I felt like that opened it up a little bit more to the sentiment. Now, I had a little bit of trouble with some glue and things shifting, so I did re-glue my stem and added some extra foam dots or glue dots. I also fishtailed the ends of the ribbon to add a little bit more interest. I will end up taping this cover down to the navy blue card base. So I'm using some double-sided tape, and I'm also going to come in with these gorgeous, gorgeous Nouveau drops. These are, I believe, navy, something like that. They have this pearlized finish. I did go a little bit crazy with them. Watching this back and looking at the finished card, I wish I'd only put on maybe 6 or 7, but it is a nice card, and they're just so much fun. Now we are on to card number 4. So this is a very black and white card, which is an odd thing to say given the fact that I'm using the orange vellum. I stamped out a bunch of black and white, or rather gray and black and white pumpkins using different Altenew inks. Again, that's because I have them, not because Altenew inks are necessarily better than other inks. I think they work perfectly for this application, and I feel like I'm putting my foot in my mouth at this point. Use whatever you have. Your inks will work and they will be fantastic. Here I'm just playing with everything. I am using a combination of double-sided tape and multi-matte medium to stick things down. I did play with these to try and get a good placement. There I'm putting my lighter colored pumpkin in the back. I'm putting my very large pumpkin a little bit forward, and I am going to end up popping up another small pumpkin in the very, very front. There I'm just playing with some of the pumpkin leaves, and now we're going to be taking off the double-sided tape. I think going black and white can be unexpected, but especially when you have a brightly colored background like this, I think it adds a nice contrast. I also, and in the next card I'll do this, and this was my idea of having black and white pumpkins in the background and then having one bright pumpkin in the foreground. I think it's unexpected and it's fun. There I'm using foam tape to stick down one of the pumpkins, and I believe I'll use multi-matte medium to stick down that leaf that I kept playing with. Now, I am going to use a sentiment that said, "You are gorgeous." Just making sure everything is nicely stuck down. And here is the sentiment. I think it's very sweet. It's very punny. It is naturally curved, and I think I let it stay naturally curved. The only thing I don't like is these are pumpkins. They're not gourds. And I guess they could be considered gourds, but I think of them as pumpkins. So I would have liked to have some gourd images to go with this. I am using my anti-static powder tool very liberally with this, with the vellum, because I don't want any of the embossing powder to stick. And I know that I'm going to use black embossing powder. This happens to be from Ranger, and we all know that black embossing powder seems to get everywhere no matter what. I do know that things like vellum and mirror cardstock, as long as you use lots of anti-static powder tool, it tends to be pretty good. I do use a brush to remove some of the excess because I do have some excess black embossing powder. And in fact, even having used the brush and gone around, after I heat set this, I did find some more. So I tried to use a knife to scrape it off, just an X-Acto knife, and I also tried to use one of those Tombow sand erasers, and it didn't really work, but it also didn't damage the background paper, the vellum, so I'm okay with that. Here I am using the double-sided tape to put behind the pumpkins, and I am actually going to end up using multi-matte medium behind the sentiment. I wanted to make sure that the vellum was stuck down very well, but I wish I had not done that, because when it dried, the vellum ended up very rippled around the sentiment. Here I'm just using a scrap piece of the orange vellum, and I put the liquid mercury Nouveau drops on it to see if I liked how that looked. And I did. Like the last card, I went a little crazy on these Nouveau drops. And I think they look nice, but I wish I hadn't put as many on, because I just went Nouveau nuts. I love this liquid mercury. It's this dark silver. It's almost like a metallic black. It's darker than silver, and it's very black, but it's metallic, and it's a very nice color. I think it goes great with the pumpkins and the sentiment. My only regret is that the sentiment is so black when the rest of the card, while it does have some black, isn't that black. Okay, here is, and there I'm just tapping it to make sure that it forms nice domes. There is the end of card number 4. So we're on to card number 5. In this case, I used some of that rock paper that came with the kit. It has little flecks of black, and I am just going to play with all of the pumpkins and the leaves and get everything situated how I like it. I'm going to use a darker and then a lighter giant pumpkin, and for the darker pumpkin I used a lighter stem, and for the lighter pumpkin I used a darker stem, because why not? Here I'm just using some liquid glue. Why I switched glue? I don't know. Mostly because I did. There I'm playing with the leaves, and I ended up doing a lot of leaf surgery, especially to cut the leaves so that I can put them, there we go, behind one another. I think it makes them look a little bit more realistic, and I like how it looks. This card was fairly simple, and it does look complicated, but a lot of it was just playing with where the different pumpkins are and how things were tucked under or over one another. One of the things that I really liked was that I spent quite a bit of time and stamped lots and lots of different layering options for the pumpkin and the sunflower and the leaves. The only thing I didn't stamp enough of were bases or stems for the sunflowers. Everything else I've just got a lot of. Here I'm using the glue to glue down our first pumpkin. I'm going to push that down with a stamping block, and I'm gluing down my second pumpkin. Again, I believe we're going to use the stamp block to make sure everything stays nicely down. And I am going to pop up my brightly colored, bright orange, tiny pumpkin. This is such a nice bright splash of color. I did think about using an orange leaf, or sorry, a green leaf with the orange pumpkin, but I decided against it. And there, I'm playing with the leaves. I do want a little bit more dimension, and I'm going to end up cutting out one leaf and popping it up with foam tape. There we go. This is a card that I think, especially if you change the sentiment, you could give to almost anyone. So this is "You Are Gorgeous." Again, depending on your personality and the people you know, you could give this to someone or you couldn't. I don't really feel comfortable telling anyone that they're gorgeous, but that's me. I'm just using some glue to stick down this rock paper. And I'm going to use, I think it's a Desert Storm, a Nina Desert Storm piece of cardstock. It is a side folding card base that I made quite a while ago. I'm also using lots of little drops of Ranger Glossy Accents. These are just looking like little raindrops on my pumpkin and on the leaves. It adds a little bit of dimension, it adds a little bit of shine, and it adds a little bit of interest without being overpowering or overwhelming. The star is really the orange pumpkin. Okay, so now we are on card number 5. This card was very fun to make, and it was very easy in one case. So I am going to do no line watercoloring. So I have stamped a pumpkin using Barely Beige on some Ranger watercolor paper. Now I'm cutting out a mask because I want to stamp a smaller pumpkin behind this big pumpkin. And the reason that my image is a little bit orange is because while I had cleaned the stamp before I stamped, I hadn't perfectly cleaned it. So there was a little orange that came off. That's why that image as well is just a little bit orange. And it's fine. It looks great in the end. And there I'm going to stamp with a leaf. I wanted to add some color to the back, and I wanted to make things just a little bit more realistic and fun. I love the tendrils that come off, and there I'm stamping, of course, the stem for the pumpkin. In this case, I'm using some Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors, and I have sped it up to 8 times normal speed. Most of the video is at 2 times normal speed, but this took quite a while, even though it was fairly simple. This happens to be my favorite watercolor set. I have a smaller one, and I got this watercolor set because I had used so many of the colors up that it made more sense to buy a larger kit and just borrow some of the colors when I needed them. I like to create my colors in wells and then pull the color out and do my painting. I believe, using cadmium red, cadmium yellow, hooker's green, viridian green, some yellow ochre, certainly some Van Dyke brown. I will use, I think it's Payne's gray and some ultramarine blue to paint the background and the base. One of the fun things with no line watercoloring is, while you do have a guide that you can follow if you choose to, you're not limited to what you've stamped. You can go off it, you can modify it, you can add shadows where you want, you can do crazy colors if you want, or you can stay very true. And it looks like you drew and painted something, but you can't see the pencil lines. And when I was younger, pencil lines on watercolors used to bother me so much, so I would try so hard to draw them as lightly as possible. But now they don't. And I think that's, something that you just have to come to grips to. They're a guide. You don't have to follow the lines that you create. They certainly help you, but they're just a guide. Now, I wanted to get some very rich colors, and I also didn't want to have a lot of blending between the areas, so I did a lot of drying with my heat gun between the layers. And that's one of the nice things about having a heat gun. It puts out a lot of heat in a fairly concentrated area, and yes, it does blow, but it doesn't blow as much as, say, a hairdryer. Previously, before I had a heat gun, I used hair dryers when I needed or wanted to dry something faster, and it certainly pushed the water around a lot. I really can't tell you how many times I wasn't paying attention and I pushed the water and the color out in a little stream. So right now I'm just adding a little bit of detail, adding some shadow, and clearing off my palette. So I did cut down this watercolor piece so that it is, I think, 3 3/4 by 5 inches. No, that doesn't make something. I believe it's a 1/2 inch shy on each side. So I popped that up with foam tape and put it in the middle of this olivey green cardstock that I have. It's a top folding note card, an A2 size note card. And here I'm going to use some gold peel offs from Love from a Lizzie. I'm just lining those up, and I'm going to create a square, or really a rectangle, around my piece. So I laid those around and I overlapped the ends. Now I'm just pressing down to miter the corners, so it creates a very nice finish. This is a great way to create something that looks very nice. It looks a little bit fancy. It looks hard to do, and it's super simple. Here I'm going to use a Hero Arts stamp set that came out in February 2017. I cannot remember what it's called, but the sentiment that I'm using is "You Brighten My Day." Here you can see the stamp set, and you can see that it is well loved. I am using VersaFine ink to stamp "You Brighten My Day" in the middle. It stamps so nicely. It's so easy to use. The only problem is it can be a little bit messy, but that's okay. If you know it's messy, then you can plan for it. And here is the end of my card. So the next card is my 6th card, I believe. No, 7th card. This card has already gone to its recipient. I had a friend having a hard day, and I know she loves pumpkins. So I have this old tag that's cut from sort of canvas. I believe I got it 2 or 3 years ago from Target in the, $1 bin section. I used multi-matte medium to attach my pumpkin and the leaves to it. And here I'm using a sentiment from one of the stamp sets from Hero Arts, and I think it's called like a kindness stamp set. I am using my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to use Versa Mark ink to stamp my sentiment. And of course, as most of my cards, I'm going to use my Simon Says Stamp in antique gold embossing powder. I simply loved how it looked with this stamp set. I believe Hero Arts has a gold embossing powder, but I don't have it. You make this world better. I love this sentiment. Everyone makes the world better in some form, and we often forget to tell people that. It's certainly, I don't know about you, but I don't just tell people that they make the world better, although I probably should. Here I'm using plenty of multi-matte medium to stick down my canvas tag. I wanted to make sure it didn't go anywhere, and I knew that this multi-matte medium would be very nice. Here I'm playing with one of the charms, and I sort of wish that I had used that instead, but I didn't, instead of the piece. And here I'm playing with it to see if I want to just replace it, but I didn't. I am going to use a glue dot to stick down my strings for the tag. One of the things that I really like about the string that came on the tag was it has a gold thread in it, which you don't see on screen, but adds a little bit of fun to the string in real life. Here I'm using some sequins. These are, I don't know, I think it's called Sparkle and Shine. So they're gold and silver, but I really like the gold color, so I use those a lot. Here we are moving on to our next card, our 8th card? No. Yeah, it's our 8th card. So I have stamped Autumn Greetings with VersaFine ink, and I dried that with my heat tool. I sent it through a We Are Memory Keepers Next Level embossing folder, and it went through just fine. It was perfect. I wanted my sentiment to be part of the pattern, and I didn't want it to be separate. The only thing was it didn't look like it got on my embossing folder, but when I embossed the other day, I did get that greeting again. So you might want to send a couple of extra pieces of paper through. there I played with one of the pumpkins and leaves, and I just put those around, and I used multi-matte medium to adhere them. I am using antique linen distressed oxide ink, and I also used vintage photo to go around it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to use white paper or if I wanted to use this background I created. I ended up cutting it down so it was 4 by 5¼ inches. That leaves a nice border, and I used, I believe, a craft cardstock to create a top folding A2 size card. I did use double-sided tape to stick down this background piece because it does have so much texture. And I didn't show you, but I also sprayed the background with water, dabbed it off, and dried it to add those beautiful little water droplets that we can see when we use distress oxide ink. I did use foam tape to attach down my pumpkin, and here I'm using, I think it's oyster or something like that. It's this clear gray Nouveau enamel dots or Nouveau dots. So I'm putting those droplets all over the background. They're very subtle, and they just add a little bit of shine that complements the rest of the card. This is definitely a card that you could give to a guy. It's not girly in any way. Actually, most of these cards aren't terribly girly. This is card number 9. So I used a Chevron stamp from My Favorite Things to stamp the background in, I believe it was vintage photo, and I didn't show you that. Here I'm just using some green paper that I have layered on top of some brown paper, and I evened it up. I stamped Sending You Sunshine using Versamark ink, and I'm going to use my Hero Arts antique gold embossing powder. You can see that I got sort of a mark on the green paper. That's going to be okay. I'm going to cover that up with some other stuff. I did use my anti-static powder tool, which I'm just going to wipe off here with a Swiffer wipe. Here I'm using some tape runner, and I'm going to put some burlap twine around it. I don't know that it's burlap, but it feels like that to me. So here I'm just sort of crisscrossing it across the front. So there's 2 pieces there, and yeah. I wanted them to meet about there. I didn't want them to meet in the middle, but I wanted them to be a little bit wonky. So I'm going to play with those for a second. And off camera, I tied a bow. You didn't need to see me take a million years to tie it. I used foam tape on the back of this so it's popped up, and I put the foam tape around the pieces of twine so they weren't in the way. I am going to use a glue dot to push down my twine so it doesn't go anywhere. And I am going to use some foam tape. Here you can see I'm using foam tape on the sunflower to pop it up to add a little bit more dimension. This looks like a more complicated card than it is, which I think is always fantastic. Here are a bunch of the different sunflower stems that I had stamped. So I'm just going to cut them apart and use the leaves and parts of the stem to add some extra interest. There are no individual sunflower leaves. There is one individual leaf that comes in the kit, and I think you could use that as a sunflower leaf, but I don't feel like it looks very much like a sunflower leaf, so I didn't. Instead, I just used the stems, cut them apart, and used some multi-matte medium to adhere them down behind my sunflower. I do layer these pieces up just a little bit. And here I'm using those sequins that I used before. I'm going to use a picker-upper tool and my multi-matte medium to adhere them down. I do them fairly liberally. They add some nice dimension, they add some shine. And while this is a girlier-ish card, it's not fairly girly, it does have some sparkle and shine in that bow. I still think you could give this to a guy. You would have to know him. You couldn't just give it to any guy. But it is certainly non-gender specific. Which is an odd thing to say. Okay, so here is my card, and there it is finished. And there I'm playing with it. It doesn't work. Here we are on card 10, and as I told you, we actually have a bonus card this time. So I cut a piece of burlap, and I'm just using my multi-matte medium to adhere it. It did take a little bit of time to dry, but it is stuck down perfectly. It is not going anywhere. Today I played with a little bit, and you know, I only got one of the threads out, and it was barely there. So I probably should have pulled it out to begin with. Here are some of the pieces that I just played with. I put them together, and for the most part I'm using multi-matte medium to adhere all of these pieces down. Later on I do adhere one of, what do I adhere? I adhere one of the leaves with foam tape, and I believe that I end up actually popping up the sunflower with some foam tape over the pumpkin, but not, I definitely glue it down to the burlap because I don't want it going anywhere. I love the pumpkin leaves. They were so easy to trim and just modify to fit everywhere. There we go. I like how I could just sort of tuck them around the pumpkin, which I think adds a lot of dimension. And it was very easy to trim the little tendrils down. This took a while to construct all together, but once it was constructed, it was done. It was easy, it was simple. Here I am. You can see that in that little metal bowl I have all kinds of pieces with just my leaves and my stems and my pumpkins, and my sunflowers are actually piled up by ink types on another part of my table. I should have taken a picture so I could show you, but I didn't. Oh well. There we go, and I'm going to get out the foam dots, or just little foam dots, and use those to stick down that leaf. Here I am trimming my sunflower. I wanted to make sure that it had some leaves. It wasn't just pumpkin leaves and pumpkin tendrils. Okay. Here I am liberally coating everything with multi-matte medium. I end up putting a stamping block on this, and I left it just all night to dry because I wanted it to stay there and be permanent. So this is the next morning, I believe, or the next afternoon. It's dried, and there we go. So this is my bonus card, and this is inspired by Vicky of Clips and Cuts. She did a card using Tim Holtz or Sizzix die cuts. And when I was cutting out my dozens, if not, well, definitely not hundreds of pumpkins and pieces, I noticed that the stems for the pumpkins looked a lot like horns. So what I did was cut out all of the pieces using black cardstock. You can see that my face part is actually the small pumpkin turned sideways, and the horns are just the stem for the large pumpkin. I am using the Wilted Violet Distress ink, and I'm using just some paper tortillons. I don't ever remember what they're called. To add just a little bit of shadow or highlight. On screen, it's going to be very intense, but now that I'm looking at it, I have it in my hand, it's not nearly as intense. And those eyes and that nose, it looks pretty awful. But only one of the eyes is peeking out. So yes, it looks pretty awful and weird right now. It doesn't in the end. So here's my piece of black cardstock that I'm going to put onto a navy or midnight blue A2 size card base. I did cut the black so it has a 1/4 inch allowance on it. I have a pumpkin, and I cut off all of the white parts, so that's just pure pumpkin. You can see there that I was deciding if I wanted the white parts or not. I'm using my tape runner, and I have a piece of sort of pearlized vellum. This came in the graphics vellum set. You could purchase that from Simon Says Stamp or Amazon.com. There is my pumpkin. I am going to pop it up with some foam tape. And there's my little demon face that looks pretty awful. I promise, if you do this, it won't look nearly as weird as it does right now. There we go. And I angled it so that it was covering all but one eye. And I believe, yep, there I'm coming in with my Spectrum Noir shimmer pen. I'm going over what should be the highlights for the pumpkin, and then I'm going to go over the highlights for my demon head. So everywhere that I put the Distress Oxide ink, I went over. Here I'm using my anti-static powder tool very liberally. I am going to stamp Happy Halloween using a stamp from Newton's Nook. They have these spooky skeletons. They're so cute. I like the script for this, and I did want it to be a Halloween card. I am using some silver embossing powder, and I heat set that. It creates this wonderful silver color, obviously, and it's got great coverage. Once it was heat set, I will use my Swiffer dusting cloth to pick up all of the anti-static powder tool. There you go. And what you didn't see, these are what's left over. I put on a bunch of sequins. I didn't use those are all of the sunflowers that I had left over. The raffia twine that I forgot about, the brass gems. So here's my first card, Sending You Sunshine. The second card, there's my third card, and You Are Gorgeous, my fourth card. Another You Are Gorgeous, fifth. The watercolor is the sixth. This is the seventh card, the eighth card. These were so much fun to make, and they were so easy. These are very simple cards, and I think you could easily mass produce most of them. And there's my bonus card with the extra sequins. Here are individual shots of the cards. Thank you guys for watching. I hope that you enjoyed these, and I hope that you were inspired. I really hope that you have a great day. If you have this kit, enjoy using it. If you don't, there are lots of other great sets out there. I'm sure you'll find something that would work instead. And just have fun paper crafting. That's what it's there for having fun, for being inspired, for doing something new, for stepping outside of your comfort zone in a safe environment. Okay, thank you for watching. This is Gretchen, the Verdant Crafter. I hope you have a great day. Bye.